The Galactic Council chamber was silent as the human delegation walked in. Ambassador Sarah Chen led her team of engineers through the massive doors, their footsteps echoing against the ancient stone floor. Around them, hundreds of alien species watched with curiosity, confusion, and in some cases, clear disgust. The chamber itself was enormous, built thousands of years ago by species that had long since faded into history. Floating platforms held delegates from every corner of the galaxy, each one representing civilizations that had been traveling between stars for millennia. Humanity had only been part of the galactic community for 3 years. In that time, they had gained a reputation, not for their military strength, which was modest at best, not for their population, which was tiny compared to the great empires that ruled vast sectors of space. They had gained a reputation for being strange, for thinking in ways that made no sense to anyone else, for asking questions that seemed obvious to them, but bewildering to species that had existed for thousands of generations. High Counselor Vexthor of the Kelrani Empire raised one of his 4 arms for attention. His blue skin shifted to a deeper shade, indicating his seriousness. The Kelrani were one of the oldest species in the galaxy, their civilization stretching back over 50,000 years. They had built the first starships that traveled faster than light. They had mapped the galaxy. They were considered the masters of space travel, and their word carried weight that few could match. "We have called this emergency meeting to address a crisis," he announced, his voice amplified by ancient technology that filled every corner of the chamber. "The Drift Fleet has suffered catastrophic failures. 47 starships are now stranded in the outer reaches. Their engines have failed. Their life support systems are degrading. 12,000 beings from 17 different species will die within the next rotation unless we find a solution." Murmurs spread through the chamber like waves across a pond. The Drift Fleet was one of the largest trading fleets in the galaxy, carrying goods and passengers between dozens of star systems. Its ships were built by the Kelrani, using designs that had been refined over 10,000 years. They were supposed to be the most reliable ships in existence. For them to fail was unthinkable. "How did this happen?" asked Representative Glonak of the Vorthian Collective. His gelatinous body pulsed with concern, ripples of anxiety passing through his translucent form. The Vorthians were a thoughtful species, known for their philosophical traditions and their careful approach to problems. "We do not know," Vexthor admitted, and the admission clearly cost him. His color shifted to show shame mixed with frustration. "Our engineers have examined the data transmitted from the stranded ships. The quantum flux regulators failed simultaneously across all ships. We have never seen anything like this. There is no precedent in all our records." "Perhaps it was sabotage," suggested the delegate from the Throx Federation, his armored body clicking as he spoke. "The Drift Fleet carries valuable cargo. Perhaps someone wanted to disable it." "We have considered that possibility," Vexthor replied. "But the failure pattern does not match any known sabotage method. It appears to be a fundamental flaw in the engines themselves, a flaw that existed in all 47 ships and only now manifested." Ambassador Chen cleared her throat. The sound was small in the vast chamber, but it drew attention. Several delegates turned to look at the human woman with expressions ranging from curiosity to condescension. "If I may speak, High Counselor." Vexthor looked at her with poorly hidden annoyance. The Kelrani had never been impressed by humanity. To them, humans were children who had barely learned to walk, now trying to run with species that had been sprinting for eons. "The human delegation may speak." "Thank you. My team has reviewed the technical specifications you shared with all council members yesterday. We believe we understand the problem, and we think we know how to fix it." Several alien delegates laughed openly. The Kelrani ambassador, a stern woman named Tervan, actually snorted in disbelief. Even some of the more diplomatic species failed to hide their amusement. "Forgive me, Ambassador Chen," said Vexthor, his tone suggesting he didn't want forgiveness at all. "But your species has been traveling between stars for less than a century. The Kelrani have been building starships for 10,000 years. Our engineers are trained for 200 years before they are allowed to work on engines. How could you possibly understand our technology better than we do?" Sarah Chen smiled. It was a patient smile, the kind she had learned to use often since humanity joined the galactic community. She had heard versions of this speech many times before. Every species assumed that age meant wisdom, that tradition meant correctness, that the old ways were the best ways simply because they had endured. "With respect, High Counselor, sometimes fresh eyes see things that experience blinds us to. May I have Chief Engineer Marcus Webb explain our analysis?" Vexthor waved his upper right arm in a gesture of permission, though his color showed his doubt. He expected this to be embarrassing for the humans. He expected them to reveal their ignorance. He was prepared to be generous in the face of their failure. Marcus Webb was a short man with gray hair and oil-stained hands. He looked nothing like the polished diplomats around him. His clothes were practical rather than elegant. His face was weathered from years of work in ship bays and machine shops. He stepped forward and activated his datapad, projecting a holographic image of a Kelrani starship engine into the center of the chamber. "This is beautiful work," he began, his voice carrying genuine admiration. "Really impressive. I mean that sincerely. The quantum flux regulators are elegant pieces of engineering. The power distribution system is sophisticated and well-designed. The cooling networks are intricate and efficient, but there's a problem. A fundamental problem that I don't think anyone has noticed because it's been there from the beginning." He zoomed in on a specific component, a crystalline structure that pulsed with soft light. "This right here, what do you call it?" "That is the tertiary harmonic stabilizer," said the Kelrani ambassador with obvious pride. "It took our engineers 300 years to develop. It is considered one of the greatest achievements in quantum flux technology." "Right, and what does it do?" The ambassador blinked all 6 of her eyes in confusion. The question seemed absurd to her, like asking what water does or why stars shine. "It stabilizes the harmonic frequencies in the quantum flux field. That is obvious from its name." "Okay, but why do the harmonic frequencies need stabilizing?" There was a long pause. The ambassador looked confused. Because the quantum flux field has harmonic frequencies that become unstable. Everyone knows this. It is basic physics." Marcus nodded encouragingly. "And why does the quantum flux field have those harmonic frequencies in the first place?" More silence. The ambassador turned to her technical advisors, who whispered among themselves urgently. The question had never occurred to them. The harmonic frequencies had always been there. They were simply a fact of quantum flux travel, like gravity was a fact of mass or heat was a fact of energy. "The harmonic frequencies are a natural property of quantum flux fields," the ambassador finally said, her confidence wavering slightly. "They have always been there. Since the first engineers discovered quantum flux travel 8,000 years ago, it is documented in every textbook. It is taught in every engineering school. It is known." Marcus Webb smiled. It was not a mocking smile, but one of genuine understanding. He had seen this before, many times. The confidence that came from tradition, the certainty that came from repetition, the blindness that came from never being asked to explain the obvious. "Here's the thing," he said, pulling up a new diagram. "The harmonic frequencies aren't a natural property of the field. They're a side effect of how you generate the field. Look at this." The new diagram showed the internal workings of a Kelrani quantum flux generator. Complex loops of energy flowed through crystalline matrices, feeding back into themselves in recursive patterns. Your quantum flux generators use a recursive feedback loop to create the field. That's what creates the harmonics. The harmonics then require the stabilizers. The stabilizers draw power, which creates heat. The heat requires cooling systems. The cooling systems require more power. More power means bigger generators. Bigger generators mean more harmonics. Your entire engine design is built around managing a problem that you created in the first place. The chamber erupted in noise. Some delegates were outraged at the suggestion that the Kelrani had made such a basic error. Others were confused, unable to follow the logic. The Kelrani delegation was having what appeared to be a collective breakdown, their colors shifting through patterns of denial, anger, and dawning horror. "That is impossible," the Kelrani ambassador shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We have been building engines this way for millennia. If there was a flaw, we would have found it." "Not if the flaw was in your original assumption," Marcus replied calmly. "Every improvement you've made has been about better managing the harmonics, better stabilizers, better cooling, more efficient power distribution. But no one ever asked why the harmonics exist or if they needed to exist at all, because everyone assumed they were natural. Everyone assumed they were unavoidable. Everyone assumed the first engineers knew what they were doing." High Counselor Vexther raised his arms for silence. When the chamber finally quieted, he looked at Marcus with new interest. The human had not backed down. He had not apologized. He had stated his position clearly and stood by it. "Are you saying you know how to build a quantum flux generator without harmonic frequencies?" Marcus shook his head. "No, I'm saying we never would have built one with harmonic frequencies in the first place. Human engineers are trained to ask why at every step. If something creates a problem, we don't just solve the problem. We ask if that something needs to exist at all. We look for root causes, not symptoms." He pulled up another diagram, this one showing a much simpler design. "This is a design my team put together last night. It generates a quantum flux field using a linear cascade instead of a recursive loop. No harmonics, no stabilizers needed, no extra cooling. It's about 40% more efficient than your current design, and it's much simpler. We could build a prototype in a few days." The Kelrani ambassador stared at the diagram. Her color had changed to something no one in the chamber had ever seen before, a mixture of shock and something that might have been wonder. This is not possible. Our engineers would have thought of this. In 10,000 years, someone would have questioned the harmonics." "Why would they?" Marcus asked gently. "Your engineering tradition is 10,000 years old. Every engineer learns from the ones before. They learn how to make the stabilizers better, how to optimize the cooling, how to manage the harmonics. But no one learns to question the basic design. It's always been this way. It's always worked. Why change it? Why question what everyone knows to be true?" Ambassador Chen stepped forward, her diplomatic instincts kicking in. "We're not here to embarrass anyone. We're not here to claim superiority. We're here to help. 12,000 people are dying in the outer reaches. If you'll allow our engineers to work with yours, we believe we can save the Drift Fleet. We can worry about the implications later." Vexther was silent for a long moment. His color shifted through several shades as he wrestled with what he had just heard. Finally, he nodded slowly. "The human engineers may assist with the rescue operation. We will provide full access to the stranded ships, but I expect regular reports on your progress, and I expect explanations at every step." "You'll have them," Marcus promised. "Questions and explanations are what we do best." 3 days later, Marcus Webb stood in the engine room of the Kelrani flagship Eternal Harmony, surrounded by alien engineers. They watched him with expressions that ranged from skepticism to wonder to barely concealed hostility. The flagship had been sent to rendezvous with the stranded Drift Fleet, carrying Marcus and his team along with the best Kelrani engineers available. The engine room was massive, filled with equipment that hummed and glowed with energy. Cooling pipes ran along every surface. Stabilizer units lined the walls, each one the size of a small house. Power conduits as thick as tree trunks fed energy to systems designed to manage problems that, according to Marcus, didn't need to exist. The modifications aren't complicated, he explained, pointing at the massive quantum flux generator that dominated the center of the room. We need to remove the recursive feedback coupling and install a linear cascade array. Then we can take out the stabilizers entirely. The engine will be simpler, more efficient, and more reliable. Chief Engineer Crixnell of the Calrani shook his head slowly. His 6 eyes blinked in sequence, showing his disbelief. He had been building engines for 200 years. He had trained under masters who had trained under masters. The idea that a human who had been working in space for less than a century could teach him anything was offensive. If we remove the stabilizers, the ship will tear itself apart. The harmonics will destroy the hull in seconds. This is not theory. This is fact. I have seen ships destroyed by unstabilized harmonics. I have lost colleagues to that fate. There won't be any harmonics, Marcus said patiently. That's the whole point. The harmonics come from the recursive feedback. Remove the feedback, remove the harmonics. It's cause and effect. But there are always harmonics. Every quantum flux field has them. It is the nature of the phenomenon. It is written in every textbook. It is proven by every experiment ever conducted. Marcus sighed. He had explained this dozens of times now. The Calrani were brilliant engineers capable of building machines of incredible sophistication, but they couldn't seem to grasp the concept. Their minds were locked into patterns that had been reinforced for thousands of years. The harmonics existed. The stabilizers were necessary. This was knowledge. This was truth. To question it was to question reality itself. Look, he said, trying a different approach. Let me ask you something. When you were young, before you became an engineer, did anyone ever tell you there would always be harmonics in a quantum flux field? Crixnell thought about it. His eyes closed one by one as he searched his memory, going back 200 years to his earliest training. Yes, in our first year of training, it was the very first lesson. Quantum flux fields generate harmonic frequencies. Harmonic frequencies must be stabilized. This is the fundamental principle of faster-than-light travel. I can still hear my teacher's voice saying those words. And did anyone ever explain why there are harmonics? Not that there are harmonics, but why? Because that is the nature of quantum flux fields. It is how they behave. It is their property. But it's not the nature of quantum flux fields. It's the nature of how you generate them. The recursive feedback creates the harmonics. Change how you generate the field and there are no harmonics. Your first engineers discovered one way to create quantum flux. A brilliant way, an amazing achievement, but it wasn't the only way. And the way they chose happened to create harmonics. So they built stabilizers. And then everyone who came after assumed that quantum flux meant harmonics, and harmonics meant stabilizers. No one ever went back to question the original design. One of the younger Calrani engineers, a female named Yeltha, stepped forward hesitantly. She was barely 50 years old, young by Calrani standards, and her color showed a mixture of curiosity and fear. I think I understand, she said, her voice quiet. You are saying we created the harmonics ourselves without knowing it, that they are not natural but artificial, a consequence of our choices. Marcus smiled at her. Exactly. Your first engineers made a choice 8,000 years ago. They probably didn't even know it was a choice. They found a way to generate quantum flux and it worked. The harmonics appeared, so they dealt with them. But they never asked if there was another way. And no one since has asked either because everyone learned that harmonics are natural. Everyone learned that stabilizers are necessary. The assumption became fact. The temporary solution became permanent architecture. But the original design works, Crixnell protested, though his voice had lost some of its certainty. Our ships travel the galaxy. They have done so for millennia. The system functions. It does, but working isn't the same as being good. Working isn't the same as being optimal. Your ships are incredibly complex. They require massive amounts of power just to manage problems that don't need to exist. Your ships are slower than they could be, less efficient than they could be, less reliable than they could be. And every improvement you've made has been about better managing the harmonics, not about questioning whether the harmonics should exist at all. He pulled out his tools and began to work on the generator. Let me show you. Let me prove it. If I'm wrong, you can put everything back the way it was. But if I'm right, you'll have an engine that's better than anything your civilization has ever built. Over the next 12 hours, Marcus and his team modified the flagship's engine. They removed kilometers of conduits that fed the stabilizers. They took out the cooling systems that had managed the heat from those stabilizers. They simplified the power distribution network, removing redundant systems that were only necessary because of the harmonics. When they were done, the engine room looked almost empty compared to before. Where once there had been a forest of equipment, now there was open space. The quantum flux generator sat alone in the center of the room, connected to the ship systems by a fraction of the cables it had once required. "This cannot be right," Crixnell said, staring at the modifications with something like horror. "Where is everything? Where are the backup systems, the redundant stabilizers, the emergency cooling units? If something goes wrong, we will have no way to compensate." "You don't need them," Marcus replied calmly. "This engine won't create the problems those systems were designed to solve. It's like removing a bucket from under a leaky roof and then removing the leak. You don't need the bucket anymore because there's nothing to catch." "But what if something else goes wrong? What if there's a failure we haven't anticipated?" "Something might. Engineering is never perfect, but it will be a real problem, not a self-created one. And it will be much easier to fix because the system is so much simpler. Complexity breeds failure. Simplicity breeds reliability." Crixnell looked at the human with an expression that might have been respect, or might have been fear, or might have been both. "You people are insane," he said quietly. "Completely insane. You tear apart everything we know and call it progress." Marcus laughed, a genuine sound of amusement. "That's what everyone says, every time, ready to power it up." The moment of truth came when they activated the modified engine. The Kelrani engineers watched their screens with fear in their eyes. They expected to see the familiar pattern of harmonic frequencies, spiking upward as the quantum flux field formed. They expected to see the ship start to shake as the unstabilized harmonics tore at the hull. They expected disaster. Instead, they saw nothing. The quantum flux field formed perfectly, smoothly, without a single spike or irregularity. The monitors that were supposed to show harmonic frequencies showed flat lines. The stabilizers that should have been working overtime to keep the ship intact sat idle, disconnected from systems that no longer needed them. "Where are the harmonics?" Yeltha asked, her voice filled with wonder. "The screens show nothing, no frequencies, no instabilities, nothing." "There aren't any," Marcus said simply. "I told you, no recursive feedback, no harmonics, it's that simple." The engine hummed smoothly, more smoothly than any Kelrani engine had ever run. Power output was up 43%. Heat generation was down by 60%. Efficiency metrics that had taken centuries to optimize were suddenly obsolete because the problems they measured no longer existed. The ship was performing better than it ever had. Crixnell stared at his displays in silence for a long time. His color shifted through shades that had no names, emotions that had no words. Finally, when he spoke, his voice was quiet and raw. "I have been an engineer for 200 years. I have designed engines for starships that travel across the galaxy. I have won awards for my innovations. I have trained hundreds of younger engineers, and I never once questioned why we needed stabilizers. I just assumed we did, because everyone always told me we did, because every book I ever read said we did, because every teacher I ever had taught me we did." He turned to look at Marcus, his eyes wet with something that might have been tears if Kelrani had tear ducts. "How do you do it? How do you humans question everything? How do you see what we cannot see?" Marcus thought about the question carefully before answering. It was a question he had been asked many times since humanity joined the galactic community, and he had never found a perfect answer. "I think it's because we're new," he said finally. "We haven't been doing this for thousands of years. We don't have traditions that go back forever. Every time we encounter something, we're seeing it for the first time. We don't know what's supposed to be normal, so we question everything. We don't know what everyone knows, so we ask stupid questions. And sometimes, those stupid questions turn out not to be stupid at all." "That sounds exhausting," Crixnell said. Marcus grinned. "Sometimes it is, but it also means we don't get stuck in patterns. We're always looking for better ways to do things, even if the old way works fine. We're always asking why, even when the answer seems obvious. Because sometimes the obvious answer is wrong. Sometimes the things everyone knows are the things no one has bothered to check." The news of the successful modification spread quickly through the fleet. Within hours, Kelrani ships from across the sector were requesting the same upgrades. Marcus and his small team of human engineers found themselves overwhelmed with work. They modified one ship, then another, then another. Each time the results were the same: better performance, higher efficiency, greater reliability. But something else was happening too, something more important than the technical improvements. The Kelrani engineers were starting to understand. They weren't just copying the human design anymore. They were beginning to ask questions of their own. "If the harmonic stabilizers were unnecessary," Yeltha said one day, as she worked alongside Marcus on yet another engine, "what else might be unnecessary? What other problems have we created and then spent centuries solving? What other assumptions have we never questioned?" Marcus looked at her with genuine pride. She was the first Kelrani to truly understand, the first to internalize not just the solution but the method that produced it. "Now you're thinking like a human," he said. "Now you're asking the right questions." The news traveled back to the Galactic Council. Ambassador Chen presented the results of the Drift Fleet rescue mission, which had succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. Every stranded ship had been modified and was now operating more efficiently than ever before. The 12,000 beings who had been facing death were safe, their ships performing better than when they had left port. But the real story wasn't about the rescue. It was about the questions that the rescue had inspired. "We have been building starships for 10,000 years, High Counselor Vexther said in his address to the Council. "We thought we knew everything there was to know about space travel. We thought our methods were perfected, our designs optimal, our knowledge complete. The humans have shown us that knowledge can be a prison as much as a gift. Their engineers don't just solve problems. They question whether those problems need to exist at all." He paused, his color shifting to something thoughtful and humble. "I have ordered a complete review of all Kelrani technology, not to find improvements within our existing systems, but to question whether those systems are designed correctly in the first place. The humans have taught us something we had forgotten, that the most important question in engineering is not, how do we make this work better? But why does this work the way it does?" The revolution spread slowly at first, then all at once. Within a year, species across the galaxy were inviting human engineers to examine their technology. The results were always the same: centuries or millennia of tradition overturned by simple questions that no one had thought to ask. The Vorthian Collective had been struggling with their communication systems for 4,000 years. Their faster-than-light broadcasts were plagued by interference that required massive filtering arrays to manage. Entire space stations were devoted to cleaning up signals that arrived scrambled and distorted. A human engineer named Lisa Chang spent 3 days studying their system before asking a question that changed everything. "Why do you broadcast on this particular frequency band?" The Vorthian engineers explained that it was the frequency their ancestors had discovered was best for FTL transmission. The records were ancient, going back to the dawn of Vorthian space travel. This was the frequency. This was how it was done. This was known. "But have you ever tested other frequencies?" They had not. Why would they? This frequency worked. Their ancestors had said it was the best. The holy texts of their engineering tradition declared it optimal, so it had to be the best. Lisa suggested they try a frequency band that no Vorthian had ever considered, one that their models said should be unusable. She was wrong about why she thought it might work, but she tried it anyway. The interference disappeared completely. Their communication system, which had required billions of credits worth of filtering equipment and thousands of technicians to maintain, suddenly worked perfectly with almost no additional hardware. The Vorthians were so grateful they offered Lisa a planet. She politely declined, asking instead for permission to study their historical records to understand why the original frequency had been chosen. She found that it had been selected by accident, a side effect of the equipment available to the early Vorthian engineers. It had never been optimal. It had just been first. Similar stories played out across the galaxy, one after another, species after species learning that their oldest knowledge was often their blindest spots. The Nexari had been fighting a bacteria that attacked their food stores for 2,000 years. They had developed increasingly sophisticated sterilization systems that consumed massive amounts of energy. Their agricultural stations glowed with radiation. Their food processing facilities were fortresses against microbial invasion. A human biologist named David Okonkwo asked why they stored their food at the temperature they did. The Nexari explained that it was the optimal temperature for food preservation. Their ancestors had determined this. It was traditional. It was proper. It was the way things were done. David pointed out that this temperature was also optimal for the bacteria they were fighting. It turned out that a simple adjustment of a few degrees solved a problem that had plagued the Nexari for millennia. The bacteria couldn't survive at the lower temperature. Their sophisticated sterilization systems became unnecessary overnight. The Throx had artificial gravity generators that required constant maintenance. Teams of technicians worked around the clock to keep them functioning. The hum of their spinning mechanisms was so ubiquitous that Throx children thought it was the sound of being indoors. A human physicist named Maria Santos looked at the design and asked why the generators needed to spin. The Throx explained that spinning was required to generate the gravity field. It was physics. It was fundamental. Everyone knew this. Maria pointed out that this was only true if you generated gravity the way the Throx did it. If you used a different method, spinning was unnecessary. Within a month, the Throx had gravity generators that required no moving parts at all. They were silent, efficient, and practically maintenance-free. The sound that generations of Throx had associated with civilization itself disappeared, replaced by a silence that some found unsettling and others found profound. Everywhere the humans went, they asked simple questions that no one else had thought to ask, and everywhere they went, they found the same thing: advanced civilizations locked into patterns of thinking that were thousands of years old, traditions so deeply embedded that no one even recognized them as traditions anymore. They were just the way things were done. They were just how things work. They were just known. Back on Earth, scientists and philosophers tried to understand what made humans different. Why could they see what other species could not? Why could they ask questions that seemed obvious in hindsight, but that no one had ever asked before? It's not that we're smarter, explained Dr. James Morton, a cognitive scientist who had dedicated his career to studying human innovation. The Kelrani are brilliant. Their mathematical abilities exceed ours. The Vorthians are creative. Their art is centuries ahead of anything we've produced. The Nexari have memories that put ours to shame. They can recall events from 1,000 years ago with perfect clarity. But they all share something: very long cultural histories. They've been doing things the same way for thousands or tens of thousands of years. That's enough time for temporary solutions to become permanent assumptions. That's enough time for choices to become facts. He paused, looking at a star chart that showed all the species humanity had helped, dots of light scattered across the galaxy like stars in their own right. New, really new. Our entire technological civilization is only a few centuries old. Our space program is younger than some individual aliens. We haven't had time to develop those deep assumptions. When we look at an alien technology, we see it fresh. We don't know what's supposed to be normal. We don't know what everyone knows. So we question everything. And sometimes that questioning reveals what others have forgotten, that everything was a choice once and choices can be made differently. But won't that change? A journalist asked. Won't we eventually develop our own locked-in patterns? Won't we become like them given enough time? Dr. Morton nodded slowly. Probably. Almost certainly, in fact. That's why this moment is so important. We need to document everything we're learning, not just the technical solutions, but the way of thinking that produces them. We need to build a culture of questioning that can survive even when we've been doing things for thousands of years. We need to make sure that future humans always remember to ask, why, even when the answer seems obvious. It was a challenge that many felt was impossible. How could you institutionalize curiosity? How could you mandate questioning? How could you prevent the very success of your innovations from becoming the foundation of new orthodoxies? But that was a problem for the future. For now, humanity had work to do. Ambassador Chen was working late in her office when the urgent message came. High Counselor Vexther himself had sent it, marked with the highest priority classification available. Ambassador Chen, the message read, we have a situation that requires your immediate attention. Something is happening that we do not understand. We believe human insight may be our only hope. Please come to the Kalrani homeworld immediately. Sarah gathered her team and boarded the fastest ship available. The journey took 3 days through modified engines that now hummed with quiet efficiency. When they arrived at the Kalrani homeworld, they found not triumph but turmoil. The streets of the great cities were filled with protesters. Economic indicators scrolled across public screens, all of them negative. The color of the Kalrani they passed showed fear, confusion, anger. 6 months ago, Vexther explained in a private meeting, his color darker than she had ever seen it, we began implementing the changes your engineers suggested. We questioned our systems. We simplified our technology. We removed unnecessary complexity. We applied the human method to everything we could find. That's good, Sarah said carefully, sensing that it was not good at all. Isn't it? It was, at first. Our ships became faster and more efficient. Our cities used less power. Our manufacturing became simpler and cheaper. Products that once required teams of specialists could now be built by anyone. Tasks that once took days could be completed in hours. It was everything you promised. It was miraculous. But then something happened, Sarah guessed. Vexther nodded. He pulled up a display showing Kalrani society in aggregate, thousands of data points summarizing the health of a civilization that had existed for 50,000 years. Economic indicators were plummeting. Social cohesion metrics were falling. Mental health reports were alarming. And in the corner of the display, a symbol Sarah had never seen before was blinking red. What is that? She asked. That is the symbol for existential crisis, Vexther said quietly, each word carrying the weight of millennia. It has not appeared since the Great Collapse 15,000 years ago. It means our civilization is questioning its own purpose, its own meaning, its own right to exist. He turned to face her, his color so dark it was almost black. Ambassador Chen, your people taught us to question everything. We questioned our technology, we questioned our traditions, we questioned our assumptions, and now we cannot stop questioning. We are questioning why we exist, why we do anything at all, why anything matters. Sarah felt her heart sink. You're experiencing a collective philosophical crisis. Yes, and we do not know how to stop it. Our people are losing faith in everything they once believed. Our engineers refuse to build because they question whether anything needs to be built. If all our previous work was based on flawed assumptions, how can we trust that new work won't be the same? Our leaders refuse to lead because they question whether leadership itself is necessary. Our teachers refuse to teach because they question whether knowledge has value if it can be overturned so easily. Our priests refuse to pray because they question whether their gods ever existed. He reached out and took Sarah's hand, a gesture of desperate trust that crossed the gulf between species. You taught us to question. Now you must teach us something else. You must teach us how to find answers. You must teach us how to stop. Marcus Webb arrived the next day with a team that included not just engineers but philosophers, psychologists, and what Earth called meaning specialists. People who had dedicated their lives to understanding why beings needed purpose and how they could find it. They had been preparing for this possibility ever since the revolution began. Some had warned that it would happen. Others had hoped it wouldn't. But everyone had agreed that it was possible, perhaps even inevitable. It was bound to happen, Marcus explained to the gathered Kelrani leaders. Questioning is powerful. It's the most powerful tool we have for understanding the universe and improving our lives. But it can't exist alone. It's like a solvent that dissolves everything it touches. Useful for cleaning, but you need something to remain when the cleaning is done. What? Vexthor asked, his voice raw with need. What must remain? Purpose, meaning, values. The things that tell you what questions are worth asking and what answers are worth finding. The things that give structure to an otherwise formless universe. He brought up a display of human history, showing the rise and fall of civilizations, the great transformations that had shaped humanity's path to the stars. We went through something similar back on Earth. Multiple times, actually. Every time we had a major shift in our understanding of the universe, we experienced a crisis of meaning. The scientific revolution, when we learned that Earth wasn't the center of everything. The Industrial Revolution, when machines began doing work that had defined human identity for millennia. The Digital Revolution, when information became more powerful than physical goods. Each one forced us to question old assumptions, and each one was followed by a period of confusion and despair. How did you survive? A Kelrani philosopher asked, her voice trembling. How did you find meaning again? We learned that questioning and meaning work together. They're not opposites, they're partners. You question in order to find better answers, but you need values to tell you what better means. You need purpose to tell you why finding answers matters at all. Without meaning, questioning becomes nihilism. Without questioning, meaning becomes dogma. You need both. He looked at the gathered Kelrani with compassion born of understanding their pain. Your civilization has been building starships for 10,000 years. That's an amazing purpose. It's something to be proud of. But somewhere along the way, you forgot why you were building them. You were so focused on making them better that you lost sight of what better meant. You optimized and improved and refined, but you forgot the reason behind it all. We built them because that is what we do, Vexthor said slowly, searching for words that felt increasingly empty. It is our identity. We are the starship builders. It is who we are. That's a good start, but why does the galaxy need starships? What do they make possible? What dreams do they enable? Why should anyone care that starships exist? The room fell silent. The Kelrani looked at each other, their colors shifting through complex patterns of thought and emotion. It was a question none of them had asked in a very long time. It was a question that had been answered so long ago that the answer had been forgotten. Finally, a young Kelrani spoke up. She was barely an adult by their standards, one of the new generation that had grown up during the human revolution. Her color was bright with the courage of youth. Starships let people explore, she said. They let us discover new worlds, new species, new ideas. They connect civilizations that would otherwise be alone in the dark. They make the impossible possible. They let us dream of distant stars and then travel to those dreams. Marcus smiled at her. That's beautiful. That's exactly the kind of meaning I'm talking about. Now hold that thought in your mind when you question your designs. Don't just ask, why does this work the way it does? Also ask, does this help people explore? Does this help connect civilizations? Does this make the impossible possible? He turned to address the whole room, his voice carrying the conviction of someone who had found these answers for himself long ago. Questioning without purpose leads to paralysis. Purpose without questioning leads to stagnation. You need both. You've learned how to question. Now you need to remember why you question, not to tear down but to build up, not to destroy meaning but to find better meaning. You question your starship design so that you can build better starships, so that the galaxy can explore and connect and dream. The message spread through Kelrani society like water through dry ground. Engineers returned to their workshops, but with a new understanding. They questioned their designs, yes, but they questioned them with purpose. They asked not just, why does this work this way? But also, does this help us fulfill our purpose of enabling exploration and connection? The philosophers found new energy. Instead of drowning in endless questioning, they began constructing frameworks of meaning that could withstand scrutiny, values that made sense, purposes that endured examination. They learned from the humans that meaning doesn't have to be eternal to be valuable, and that purpose doesn't have to be perfect to be worthy. The crisis passed slowly, like a fever breaking. It left the Kelrani changed in ways that would take generations to fully understand. They were no longer just the ancient starship builders. They were a civilization that had learned to question and to dream in equal measure. They had touched the void of meaninglessness and found their way back. And humanity had learned something too. They learned that their gift of questioning came with a responsibility. When you teach someone to question, you must also help them find meaning. When you tear down old assumptions, you must help build new foundations. Revolution without reconstruction is just destruction. 5 years after first contact, humanity's place in the galaxy had transformed completely. They were no longer the strange newcomers who asked too many questions. They were no longer the primitive species that had barely learned to walk among the stars. They were the teachers, the questioners, the revolutionaries who had transformed galactic civilization. But they were also the healers, the meaning makers, the ones who helped others find purpose in a universe that could seem overwhelming in its vastness and indifference. Ambassador Chen stood before the Galactic Council one final time before her retirement. The chamber was packed with delegates from hundreds of species, all of whom had been touched by the human revolution in some way. Ships they traveled on had been improved. Systems they relied on had been simplified. Assumptions they had held for millennia had been questioned, and in many cases overturned. "When we first came here," she said, her voice carrying across the great chamber, "you thought we were primitive. You thought our short history and our lack of traditions made us weak. You thought we had nothing to offer civilizations that had existed for tens of thousands of years. You were wrong. Our newness was our strength. It let us see what others could not." She smiled, looking around at the faces, some familiar now, some still strange, that filled the chamber. She had come to love this galaxy, with all its quirks and challenges and wonders. But we learned something too. We learned that questioning alone is not enough. We learned that meaning matters as much as knowledge. We learned that the most important question is not, how does this work? But why does this matter? We learned that revolution must be followed by reconstruction, and that tearing down old ideas creates a responsibility to help build new ones. She paused, letting her words settle into the silence. Humanity will continue to question. We will continue to challenge assumptions and overturn traditions and ask why things are the way they are. But we will do it with purpose. We will do it with respect for those who came before us and hope for those who come after. We will remember that the point of questioning is not to destroy, but to build something better. High Counselor Vexther rose to speak. His color was bright, almost luminescent, a sign of deep emotion. "When the humans arrived, I thought they would be a minor footnote in galactic history, a curiosity, a brief flash of energy before they settled into the patterns of their elders. I was wrong. They have changed us in ways we never imagined possible. They have taught us to question our most basic assumptions and to find new meaning in ancient purposes. He turned to face Sarah Chen directly, meeting her eyes with all six of his own. On behalf of the Galactic Council, I thank you, and I offer humanity a new title, not just members of the galactic community, but teachers of the galaxy. You have shown us that the youngest civilization can also be the wisest, and that fresh eyes can see what ancient ones cannot. The chamber erupted in applause. Beings of 1,000 different forms celebrated the small, strange species that had changed everything by asking simple questions that no one else had thought to ask. Sarah Chen looked out at them all. The Kelrani with their color-shifting skin, the Vorthians with their pulsing translucent bodies, the Throx with their armored forms, the dozens of other species she had come to know and love over her years of service, and felt tears in her eyes. "We didn't come here to be teachers," she said when the applause faded. "We came here to learn, and we have learned so much. We have learned about your histories and your technologies and your dreams. We have learned about the galaxy we live in and the wonders it contains. We have learned about ourselves by seeing ourselves through your eyes. But I think the most important lesson is this. The universe is vast and no one species can understand it all. We need each other. We need your experience and our questioning. We need your traditions and our fresh perspectives. We need your depth and our flexibility." She spread her arms wide, encompassing the entire chamber and symbolically the entire galaxy beyond. Together, we can ask questions no one has ever asked. Together, we can find answers no one has ever found. Together, we can build a future that none of us could build alone. That is the promise of this moment. That is the gift we can give each other. That is the meaning we can find in the darkness between stars. In the years that followed, the galaxy continued to change. The human revolution spread to every corner of known space, touching every civilization it encountered. Old assumptions were challenged. Ancient traditions were questioned. Unnecessary complexity was stripped away. And everywhere, new ideas emerged from the space that was created. But something else spread too, a sense of purpose, of meaning, of hope. The galaxy was not just asking questions now. It was dreaming new dreams. It was finding new reasons to exist, new goals to pursue, new connections to forge. The void that had opened when old certainties fell away was being filled with new certainties, ones that could withstand the light of examination. And at the center of it all, always asking why, always reaching for something better, always helping others find their own answers, were the humans. The young ones, the strange ones, the ones who had come from a small blue planet on the edge of the galaxy and changed everything by never assuming they already knew the truth. Marcus Webb, now old and gray, stood on the bridge of the newest Kelrani starship, the dawn of questions. It was beautiful, simple, elegant, efficient. It was the product of 10,000 years of Kelrani tradition and 5 years of human revolution, the best of both worlds merged into something neither could have created alone. Beside him stood Crixnell, his old friend and former skeptic. The Kelrani engineer had changed over the years. His color was warmer now, showing contentment and purpose instead of the rigid certainty of before. "We're going to explore a new star cluster," Crixnell said, looking at the view screen where distant lights beckoned. "One that was too far away before your modifications made it possible. One that holds mysteries we cannot even imagine." Marcus smiled. "That's what starships are for, right? To make the impossible possible, to take us to places we couldn't go before, to help us find new questions to ask." "Yes, that is what they are for." Crixnell's color shifted to something like gratitude, deep and sincere. "Thank you, Marcus, for everything, for the questions and the answers, for the destruction and the reconstruction, for teaching us to doubt and then teaching us how to believe again. Thank you for listening. Thank you for questioning. Thank you for being willing to change after 10,000 years of staying the same. That took courage, more courage than anything we did." They stood together in silence as the stars stretched and blurred around them. the ship jumping into faster-than-light travel with smooth efficiency. The engine hummed quietly, running better than any engine in history because it did only what was necessary and nothing more. And somewhere out there in the vast darkness of space, new questions waited to be asked, new mysteries waited to be solved, new meaning waited to be found. The humans were ready, the galaxy was ready, and the adventure was just beginning.